What is up, gang? How are you tonight? I hope you are doing well. I thought the big news of the day was going to be the UFC fight card in Azerbaijan, but Dana White ended that being the big news by answering a question at the post-fight news conference. Jon Jones has retired as the UFC heavyweight champion. Tom Aspenol is now the full undisputed UFC champion, moved up from interim champion. Jones will retire with a 28-1 record, one no contest in there, a win over Daniel Cormier that was changed to no contest after an issue with his post-fight drug test. The one loss was to Matt Hamill, I believe, in 2009. It was for an illegal elbow at the time, which ironically would be legal today. It was a 12-6 elbow, injured Hamill's nose. They went to the replay, looked at it, that they determined that strike contributed to Jones not being able to, or excuse me, Hamill not being able to continue. And so Jones was disqualified and Matt Hamill given the win. But Jon Jones never actually lost a fight that he took part in. He won every fight that he ever had, most of them going away. A lot of them when he didn't even train. That is what's amazing. Jon had a checkered history outside of the cage, but when it came to in the cage, he took care of business every single time. But I think he is going to regret this decision. If he wants to retire, nobody should tell a fighter to keep fighting if he feels it's time to retire. I wrote in my column on KevinIole.com about the great boxer James Toney. And James Toney once said, you play golf, but you don't play boxing. And that is really true. And it's especially true in MMA when you think about it, right? You're not just getting punched, you're getting elbowed and kneed and kicked and slammed to the ground and all these different things. And if your heart is not in it, then absolutely you should retire. If Jones is in a good place financially with his family and he doesn't need the money, walk away from it, right? If that's what you want to do. But Jon is a guy that thinks about his legacy. And I think that when you think of Jon Jones, are you going to think of the GOAT, or are you going to think he's the guy that didn't fight Tom Aspenol? And I think that's really what he's going to be remembered for. This guy who was so talented, who could beat anybody, who was so superior to all his peers. Think of how great Daniel Cormier was, and look at what Jon Jones did to him. Think of how great so many of these other fighters were, and look at Jones did. I wrote in my column, I said, Jones left them looking like they ran into a wall in a Ferrari going 100-some miles an hour. I mean, he just disfigured people, how badly he beat them up. He was an unbelievable talent, just a special, incredible talent. And yet for some reason, he just played this game with this Aspinall fight. What I wish would have happened had he said after the fight with Stipe Miocic at UFC 309 in November, hey, I'm done. I don't want to consider any options. The division could have moved on. He's kept Aspinall from fighting for over a year. Aspinall's been the interim champion for over 500 days now. Think about that. Over 500 days. And Jon just strung it along and strung it along and strung it along. And I understand that you need some time sometimes to think about it. But if you remember, he said to me, and I did the interview, I was the one that first broke this news. I did an interview with Jon before UFC 309, and I asked him if he would fight Tom Aspenol, and he said, I don't think Aspinall brings anything to the table. But he saw by the reaction to that interview and all the subsequent comments that went on between the two of them, as well as with Dana White getting involved in it, that Aspinall did mean something. People wanted to see that fight. I think because heavyweights are always outsized, right? When you get a big heavyweight fight in boxing or MMA, it's just bigger than anything else. And I think this would have been the biggest fight in UFC history. Two elite heavyweights, both having a fair claim to the title, right? Jon beat Cyril Gane to win the interim championship, but he never did beat Francis Ngannou, who left the UFC and went to the PFL. And Tom won the interim belt. He beat Sergey Pavlovich when Jon was injured and had to pull out of a fight card in New York in 2023. So, I mean, we're looking at a situation here where both of these guys had a claim to the title. They're both elite heavyweights. They both have phenomenal skill sets, and their skill sets mesh. There's some fights you go, oh, I would never want to see that, right? But not these two guys. Jones had that great wrestling, and he could get you down, and part of his success in his career was his ability to dictate the way fights were fought and where fights were fought. He got the fight where he wanted it, and then he won it. And against Tom Aspenol, he could have gotten the fight where he wanted. Aspinall's not the greatest wrestler out there, but Aspinall has been doing jiu-jitsu since he was 5 years old. His father's a jiu-jitsu coach. He is a high-level jiu-jitsu player. Aspinall also has that unbelievable striking. He hits really, really hard. Look at what he's done to some of these guys. How many fights has he won in a minute or just over a minute? I mean, so their styles would have meshed to make a memorable fight that would have gone down in this sport's history. And Jon chose to walk away from that. And as I said, that is his right. But I also think that for a guy that cares as much about legacy as Jon Jones does, this was really a short-sighted decision. And it came up, think about how it happened too. If Jon was to retire, shouldn't he have talked to the UFC and planned a press conference? International Fight Week is coming up in a couple of days. That's always the biggest week on the UFC calendar during the year. There's so many activities. So many people are coming to Las Vegas for that event. There's going to be hundreds of other fighters here. And think what the UFC could have done. Think of the press conference that they could have had for Jon Jones. Announce, hey, Jon Jones is retiring and Tom Aspenol is the new champion. Jones would have gotten the opportunity to talk to the media, explain his decision, talk to the fans. It would have been a proper send-off. Instead, what happens is Dana White is asked a press conference after the fight in Baku, Azerbaijan, and somebody asked, what do you think is the best choice to go, strip Jones or just let him hold on to the title and wait until he makes a decision? And Dana announced then, well, Jon Jones called me yesterday and said that he is retiring. And it's just totally anticlimactic. It just doesn't have the gravitas of worthy of a guy who is the greatest fighter in the history of the sport. And I don't care what anybody says. Jon Jones is not only the greatest fighter in the history of the sport, he has lapped the field as far as the greatest fighters in the history of the sport. It's not even close, right? Jones is so far ahead of everybody else that it's not even funny. And, people talk about Fedor Emelianenko, and Fedor was great, and Fedor is one of the greats, but his prime was in an era when there weren't as many great fighters. The sport had not evolved. He was in the first 15 years of the UFC. There are better athletes now. The sport is better now. The fighters are better trained now, and that's what you're going to see. And Jon just has done so much more than Fedor. He's done more than GSP. He's done more than Anderson Silva, Habib, or Demetrius Johnson, whoever you want to say. Jones has really risen above, and I think he's the greatest ever. But now, when we talk about Jon Jones a year from now or 18 months from now, are we going to say, oh, yeah, Jones was, remember how great Jones was? Remember what he did in this fight? No, we're going to say, you know what? He walked away from the sport without fighting Tom Aspenol, without fighting his biggest rival. And that's going to hurt him. I think when he thinks about that deep in his soul later, it's going to hurt him. I think there's a good chance that he'll come back. But we lost the moment in time, right? If he comes back a year from now, Aspinall wins a couple big fights, and all of a sudden Jones thinks he's worthy, it just adds to that inactivity streak that Jon has, right? And that is, I think it just hurts the way the fight looks. Jon fought Stipe Miocic in his final fight. Stipe is 42 years old. Not the fighter. He hadn't fought in almost 4 years at the time that he fought Jones. He wasn't the same fighter that he was in his prime. He had a reputation as the greatest heavyweight in UFC history, and I think that was deserved. He had earned that through what he had done in the ring. But now you're talking about a 40-plus-year-old Stipe Miocic, who's not the same guy, who was inactive. That when Jones got over him was not that big. It should have been Aspinall he was fighting there. Dana White made the choice to make Miocic when Jones wanted that fight, because he said he had originally promised it to him a year earlier, and Jones got injured. And I understand it from that standpoint, but Jon should have been thinking, in my opinion, ahead. He's playing chess where other people are playing checkers, right? Well, this is one case where he was playing checkers, because what he should have done was thought, who is going to be the biggest fight for me to take? And beating an inactive 40-plus-year-old guy wasn't the biggest, coming off a loss. That was the other thing. Stipe was coming off a loss to Francis. So I think Jon misplayed this situation, and I really think he's going to regret when he looks at this down the road. I think he is going to regret the choice that he made. And he, like I say, he may come out of retirement. That's happened before, and we will, at that point, then potentially see the fight that we've all wanted to see. But it's never going to be the same, right? It is never going to be the same as it was at this place and this time, when both of them are still in their primes. Jon is 37, going to be 38 years old next month, and he's starting to, get out, although his performance against Miocic would suggest to you that he is still pretty doggone good. Aspinall is in his 30s. I'm not sure exactly what his age is, but neither of these guys have a lot of time, right? So why not do the fight? But Jones made the choice, and I think it's a choice that is going to he is going to regret for the rest of his life. Probably will never admit it to you or me, but I think if he thinks about it, he's going to realize that he made a mistake in this decision, and he should have gone ahead and fought Tom Aspenol. Win or lose, I don't think it would have really. It could have only helped his resume, right? Muhammad Ali lost fights at the end. Sugar Ray Leonard lost fights. Most fighters lose toward the end of their career, and it doesn't impact them, right? Demetrius Johnson, George St. Pierre, all the greats. Good. And Habib is one of the few that retired undefeated, but all the greats lost, and it doesn't really make that big of an impact on them. I think Jones just made a huge mistake. I don't think he was afraid. I don't agree with that. I don't really know why. I don't have a good theory on why he didn't take the fight. I wish I could sit here and tell you, I know Jon Jones, and this is the reason why. I don't have a good idea why it was. But for whatever the reason was, he chose to walk away, left a pile of money on the table. He broke a lot of hearts. And I think it's going to hurt him in the court of public opinion. We shall see. But Jon, my friend, I think you made a mistake. Congratulations on a great career. No doubt the GOAT, no doubt a Hall of Famer. You should have fought Tom Aspenol. That's what I say. I think that's what all your fans are going to say. And that is what you are going to be remembered for. You didn't fight Tom Aspenol. That is going to be the first thing people say when they talk about you. And to me, that's not what you really want to have. Have a good life, Jon. Congratulations on a phenomenal career. From Las Vegas, I am Kevin Iole. I appreciate you watching. Go to keviniole.com and check out all my content. Give this video a like. Please subscribe to my channel if you don't. And do me another favor. Tell a friend, okay? Thank you. I appreciate everybody.